You are one test drive away from owning a car that looks like it costs $80,000, but actually costs less than your neighbor's riding lawnmower. Rich people spend a fortune trying to look normal, but broke people have figured out how to look rich for almost nothing, and honestly, that is the far more impressive skill. Today, we are counting down 5 fake rich cars you can buy for under $6,000. The kind of cars that get valet attendants fighting over who parks them, even though the check engine light has basically become part of the dashboard decor at this point. So grab a coffee, because number 5 on this list might already be sitting in a driveway near you. Picture this. You pull into a school pickup line, and the little chrome L on the hood is already doing 90% of the social work before you have even parked. That badge alone convinces most onlookers they're looking at a car worth twice what it actually costs, and the Lexus CT200h has built its entire reputation on exactly that kind of quiet, expensive-looking mischief. Underneath the sharp, European-leaning hatchback shape sits a hybrid powertrain borrowed almost directly from the Prius, which sounds like a punchline, but honestly, that is the whole secret. You are essentially buying the internals of one of the most bulletproof hybrid systems ever engineered, dressed up in a suit it never had to earn. The 1.8-liter hybrid engine paired with its electric motor was never built to be exciting. It was built to survive, and survive it does. Owners regularly push these things well past 200,000 miles, with nothing more dramatic than oil changes and tire rotations, and independent reliability data consistently ranks this among the most dependable luxury compact cars on the road, with repair frequency and severity numbers that embarrass plenty of far pricier European rivals. Fuel economy sits in the low 40s across the board, so while everyone assumes you are burning through premium fuel to keep up appearances, you're actually spending less at the pump than most ordinary economy hatchbacks. Step inside, and the cabin still holds up its end of the illusion. Stitched leather-style surfaces, a hushed interior that isolates road noise far better than the price tag suggests, and a driving position that feels genuinely upscale rather than borrowed. Now, before you go hunting for one this weekend, there are a few things worth checking closely. Some earlier examples have shown a tendency to shudder briefly on cold morning starts before the engine settles into its normal rhythm, and a handful of owners have reported the brakes feeling momentarily soft over rough pavement, a quirk Lexus addressed through service updates as the model matured. A few early units also burned through oil faster than expected between scheduled changes. None of this defines the car as a whole, but it does mean you should never buy one blind. Always pull the complete service history, insist on a pre-purchase inspection from an independent mechanic, and pay close attention to how the brakes in cold start behave during your test drive. If you want to sidestep almost all of it entirely, aim for the final 2 model years of production, which cleaned up nearly every one of those early complaints and post the lowest complaint counts of the whole generation by a wide margin. And here's the part that makes this one worth the hunt. This is a Lexus built on Toyota bones, which means your neighborhood mechanic already knows this engine inside and out. Parts sit on the shelf instead of getting flown in from overseas, and labor costs stay grounded in reality instead of climbing into European luxury territory. You get the badge, the ride quality, the hushed cabin, and the hybrid efficiency without ever touching the kind of repair bill that usually comes attached to that 3-letter emblem. It is, in almost every practical sense, a Prius that put on a blazer and never looked back. In the used market, this model can be found starting at around $3,000, with prices reaching up to $11,000 depending on the mileage, trim, and condition of the individual unit, which puts a genuinely well-kept example easily within reach of our $6,000 target for this list. So if a car that quietly outperforms its price tag is what got you interested in this list in the first place, you're going to want to stick around, because the next entry takes that same idea and pushes it even further. Somewhere out there is a car that looks exactly like the sedan your accountant drives, sitting quietly in a grocery store parking lot, and it has a naturally aspirated V8 under the hood that could genuinely embarrass cars twice its price at a stoplight. That is the entire personality of the classic Mercedes C55,
a car so deliberately understated that most people walk right past it without realizing they just ignored one of the last truly analog performance sedans the brand ever built. It wears the same three-pointed star as everything else in the lineup, the same conservative proportions, the same badge that quietly tells the world you have arrived. Except this particular version arrived with a V8 stuffed under the hood that was never supposed to fit there in the first place, and somehow AMG made it work anyway. Under that unassuming hood sits a 5.4-liter naturally aspirated V8, producing 362 horsepower and 376 pound-feet of torque, sent through a 5-speed automatic transmission that has developed a reputation among independent mechanics as being close to indestructible. This engine shares its architecture with one of the most respected V6 engines Mercedes ever built, which is precisely why it has earned a reputation for shrugging off high mileage the way lesser performance engines simply cannot. It is not unusual to find examples pushing well past 100,000 miles that still pull hard and sound exactly the way they did on the day they left the factory. And here is the part that makes it genuinely funny. This car will out-accelerate plenty of modern turbocharged sedans that cost 3 or 4 times as much, and it does it with an exhaust note that turbocharged engines have spent the last decade trying and failing to replicate through speakers. Now, a car like this does come with a short list of things worth paying attention to. The most common complaint centers on minor oil seepage from the valve cover gaskets, which is more of an annoyance than a genuine threat to the engine, but it is worth checking for during any inspection. The broader platform is also known for a handful of electrical quirks, things like side marker light sockets or seat heater elements occasionally acting up, the kind of small gremlins that come with any European luxury car of this era, rather than anything specific to the AMG engine itself. Neglected examples have occasionally developed timing chain and tensioner noise, almost always traced back to skipped oil changes rather than any design flaw. And it is worth giving the rear wheel arches a close look for surface rust, particularly on higher mileage cars that spent winters somewhere salted. None of this should scare you off, but it does mean you should always request the complete service history and get a pre-purchase inspection from a mechanic who specifically knows this platform. If you want the safest bet in the lineup, aim for a later production example from the final couple of years, which benefited from small running refinements and tend to show up with the cleanest history on the used market today. And once you get past that short checklist, what you're left with is one of the last truly great sleeper cars ever built by a major luxury brand. This is a factory hot rod wearing a business suit, built during an era before manufacturers started chasing lap times over character, and it shows in every part of the driving experience. The V8 sound alone has become something of a cult favorite among enthusiasts, and low production numbers mean clean examples are only becoming harder to find as more of them quietly disappear into private collections. In the used market, this model can be found starting at around $5,500, with prices reaching up to $18,000 depending on mileage, service history, and the condition of the individual unit, which means a properly sorted example is still very much within striking distance of this list's price target. So, if a car with a genuine performance pedigree hiding behind a completely ordinary badge is the kind of thing that gets your attention, the next entry on this list takes that exact formula and applies it somewhere you would probably never expect to look. If you handed a French design studio an unlimited budget and told them to build the strangest, most boutique-looking luxury car humanly possible, they would hand you back exactly this, the Citroen DS5. It looks like it rolled straight out of a private concept car reveal, not a regular dealership, and that is precisely why it earns a spot on this list. Chrome saber-shaped creases run down the hood toward the headlights, the roofline dips like a coupe pretending to be a hatchback, and the whole thing photographs like it costs 3 times what it actually does on the used market. It is the automotive equivalent of showing up to a dinner party in a tailored jacket nobody else recognizes, and somehow that is the entire point. Slide inside and the theatrics keep going. 3 separate glass roof panels stretch overhead, each with its own individual sunshade, which sounds unnecessary until you were the one riding underneath a sky full of light on a long drive. The materials feel genuinely upscale, with soft touch surfaces and stitch detailing that most mainstream executive cars simply do not bother with at this price point. Standard equipment on nearly every trim includes dual-zone climate control, a touchscreen navigation system, Bluetooth connectivity, and rear parking sensors, features that plenty of German rivals still charge extra for even today. Safety credentials are equally strong, with a full 5-star crash rating and a nearly perfect score in the safety assistance category thanks to standard stability control, cornering lights, and a full suite of airbags. The most common engine you will find paired with this car is a 2.0-liter turbo diesel, which delivers strong pulling power and genuinely impressive fuel economy for a car this size and this well-equipped. Now, a car this ambitious does come with a short list of things to verify before you commit. There was an official recall addressing a starter motor wire that could chafe against nearby components on certain production dates, so it is worth confirming that work was completed before you buy. Some owners have also reported occasional electrical quirks around the infotainment system, along with a small number of complaints tied to the automated single clutch gearbox option feeling hesitant or jerky under certain conditions. And the diesel-electric hybrid variant in particular has shown a tendency toward battery degradation as mileage climbs. None of this should scare you away from an otherwise distinctive and well-built car, but it does mean you should always request a full and documented service history and get a pre-purchase inspection from a mechanic familiar with French executive cars specifically. If you want the configuration with the fewest headaches, aim for a 2.0-liter diesel paired with the traditional 6-speed manual gearbox, which sidesteps both the automated transmission complaints and the added complexity of the hybrid system entirely, while still delivering the strongest fuel economy figures in the lineup. And once you land on the right configuration, what you're left with is one of the most interesting alternatives in its entire class. This is a car that dares to look nothing like its German competition, built during an era when a mainstream manufacturer was still willing to take genuine design risks on a family-sized executive hatchback. Production numbers were modest compared to the usual suspects in this segment, which means clean, well-documented examples are becoming a rarer sight with each passing year, and that scarcity alone tends to turn heads in a way no badge ever could. In the used market, this model can be found starting at around £3,500, with prices reaching up to £19,000 depending on the mileage, specification, and condition of the individual unit, which leaves plenty of genuinely well-kept examples sitting comfortably within this list's price target. So, if a car that turns heads purely through its own audacity rather than a familiar badge is exactly the kind of pick that appeals to you, the next entry on this countdown takes that same spirit of standing apart from the crowd and pushes it into an entirely different category of vehicle.
Somewhere on a used car lot right now, there is a Lexus badge sitting on a car so quietly reliable that mechanics have genuinely started to worry about their own job security whenever one rolls into the shop. That is the classic Lexus ES300. And if you strip away the wood trim and the leather and the badge on the hood, you are looking at a car that shares its bones almost entirely with one of the most bulletproof family sedans ever built. Lexus essentially took that formula, wrapped it in a much nicer suit, added a hushed cabin and a genuinely plush ride, and sold it to people who wanted the prestige without the drama. And decades later, that exact formula still holds up remarkably well on the used market. Under the hood sits a 3.0-liter V6, borrowed from the same reliable Toyota lineage that powers everything from minivans to pickup trucks, and it shows in the way these engines refuse to quit. It is common to find examples still running strong well past 200,000 miles, and there are documented cases of original engines and transmissions surviving past the 500,000-mile mark with nothing more than consistent oil changes and routine care. The interior holds up just as well, with genuinely comfortable leather seating, a smooth and isolated ride that swallows rough pavement without complaint, and a build quality that still feels tight and rattle-free decades after leaving the factory. This is a car that was engineered around the idea that luxury should mean the complete absence of drama, and on that specific mission, it succeeded almost perfectly. Now, a car this old does come with a short list of things worth checking before you commit. The most common complaint centers on gradually increasing oil consumption as mileage climbs, which is worth monitoring closely rather than ignoring.
Some owners have also reported the ignition coils starting to fail once a car crosses the 100,000-mile mark, a fairly straightforward and inexpensive fix in the grand scheme of ownership costs. Because the timing belt on this engine operates on an interference design, it is absolutely essential to confirm it has been replaced on schedule, since a snapped belt on a neglected example can cause serious internal engine damage. None of this should discourage you, but it does mean you should always request the complete maintenance history and have an independent mechanic verify the timing belt interval specifically before handing over any money. If you want the safest possible pick, aim for a later production example from the final couple of model years, which received a modest bump in power, along with small refinements that make them the most refined and best sorted versions of this generation. And once you clear that short checklist, what you are left with is one of the most quietly dependable luxury sedans that money can buy on a shoestring budget. This is a car that essentially wears a Camry's mechanical soul underneath a genuinely upscale exterior, which is exactly why independent mechanics so rarely see them for anything beyond scheduled maintenance. Owners who have kept these cars for decades routinely describe them as the last car they will ever need to buy, and with documented examples still running strong well beyond the quarter-million-mile mark, it is easy to understand why that reputation has stuck around for this long. In the used market, this model can be found starting at around $2,000, with prices reaching up to $7,000 depending on mileage, service history, and the condition of the individual unit, putting a genuinely clean example well within easy reach of this list's budget. And that brings us right to the entry that closes out this entire list, the one that pulls together every single idea we have covered so far: expensive presence, genuine reliability, in a price tag that makes absolutely no sense until you actually understand the car underneath it.
Here's a fact that should honestly be illegal. You can walk onto a used car lot right now and drive home with a genuine BMW, badge and all, for less money than plenty of people spend on a used economy hatchback, and somehow almost nobody talks about it. The BMW 320i sits at the very bottom of the badge hierarchy, which sounds like an insult until you realize that even the entry point into this lineup still comes wrapped in rear-wheel drive dynamics, a genuinely upscale cabin, and a name that makes valet parking attendants stand up a little straighter. It is proof that sometimes the cheapest ticket into a luxury brand is still a very, very good ticket. Underneath the hood sits a 2.0-liter four-cylinder engine, and depending on which generation you land on, it comes either naturally aspirated or turbocharged, both of which deliver a genuinely satisfying blend of smooth power delivery and real day-to-day efficiency. The chassis underneath is where this car earns its reputation, because BMW built its entire identity on rear-wheel drive balance and precise steering feel, and even the base model in this lineup inherited that same fundamental engineering. Slide into the cabin, and you get a driving position that sits low and connected, genuinely supportive seats, and control layouts that still feel intuitive even on older examples. Fuel economy sits comfortably in the mid-20s in the city and climbs into the mid-30s on the highway, numbers that plenty of owners find genuinely surprising for a car that still manages to feel this engaging behind the wheel. Now, before you go chasing one down this week, there are a handful of things worth checking closely. Oil leaks around the valve cover gasket and the oil filter housing are a fairly common find as these engines rack up mileage, and it is worth having a mechanic inspect both areas during any pre-purchase check. Turbocharged examples in particular can develop carbon buildup on the intake valves over time due to the direct injection system, along with occasional high-pressure fuel pump concerns, both of which are worth asking about directly when you are reviewing service records. None of this should scare you away from an otherwise excellent chassis, but it absolutely means you should insist on a complete and documented maintenance history along with an independent inspection from a mechanic who specifically knows this platform before you sign anything. If you want the simplest and most trouble-free path into ownership, aim for an earlier naturally aspirated example paired with full service records, since it sidesteps the turbo-specific complexity entirely while still delivering that same rear-wheel drive character the badge is known for. And once you clear that short checklist, what you are left with is genuinely one of the smartest entry points into a luxury badge that exists anywhere on the used market today. This is a car built by a manufacturer that has spent decades perfecting the exact formula of balance, feel, and driver engagement, and none of that engineering DNA gets diluted just because you bought the most affordable trim in the lineup. Independent owner surveys consistently show these cars pushing well past the 150,000-mile mark with routine care, and the badge alone continues to hold resale interest in a way that plenty of mainstream sedans simply cannot match. In the used market, this model can be found starting at around $3,500, with prices reaching up to $12,000 depending on the mileage, generation, and condition of the individual unit, which puts a genuinely solid example comfortably within the spirit of this entire list.
And that closes out every single car on today's list. 5 vehicles that prove you do not need a massive budget to drive something that looks, feels, and sounds far more expensive than the number on the price tag. If one of these caught your attention, the real secret is always the same. Chase the service history, get the pre-purchase inspection, and let the badge do the talking for you afterward. If this video helped you rethink what your money can actually buy, do us a favor and hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos exactly like this one. If you have not subscribed yet, go ahead and tap that button too, because we put out new countdowns just like this one on a regular basis, covering the cars that look far richer than they actually cost. Drop a comment down below telling us which one of these 5 you would actually drive home in. We read every single one of them. Thanks for sticking around all the way to the end, and we will see you in the very next video.